Yeah, you never know.
No, you never know, Aaron. Thank you very much for taking the time. We were just talking off the air about Antonio Brown because Aaron is a Central Michigan grad, and I was grilling him of how dare he be a Michigan beat writer and a Central Michigan grad, but that's just not always the case. Doesn't work out that way all the time. So
No, no.
anyway, because you're not really supposed to be. I mean, were you a Michigan fan when you went to Central Michigan, or was that no? I'm loyal to Central Michigan. That's my school.
Yeah, it's tough to say I was a fan of anybody. I think growing up, Michigan was always good, so they were on the TV in my house and everything else. I guess you could say I
Of
was a
course,
fan, just because they were good.
yes.
But I mean, we had Michigan State on the TV. I mean, I watched it all, and then obviously when I went to college, CMU was first and foremost, obviously. But nah, I wouldn't call myself like a mega fan or anything. No,
That's okay. I mean, works first. You're supposed to be unbiased.
that's right.
So yeah, that's real important in this industry, and I know that for sure. And look, I've been saying this for the last few years. I just and it's really amazing that of all the interviews I've had over the years, whether it's players, especially of course analysts, yeah, because I don't recall any Michigan players that I've interviewed that I have never had the opportunity to interview like an analyst that covers Michigan sports. Being the fact that, as you were saying, Michigan was on TV in my household. But when I was growing up, which was back in the '70s and the early '80s, but definitely mid to late '70s, nothing was on college football unless it was Michigan, Ohio State, Penn State, the Alabama. You had to be just a selected group of teams. And since I was in New Jersey, Rutgers was not exactly a team that you really gravitated towards. I still am very loyal to Rutgers. They're still like my top team next to Michigan, but you had to adopt a team, and Michigan was my adoptive team. And this is the first time that I've been able to interview somebody that can give me the scoop on what's going on with Michigan. And I hope this is an opportunity that I can keep using and I that'd be great because I just can't believe it. I think about it sometimes and I'm like, I can't believe that it's taken me this long. But also part of that is the fact that I'm kind of a little bit picky when it comes to. I just don't want to have anybody on. I want to make sure that they know what they're talking about, that they're really dialed in. So it's been kind of hard. So thank you very much. Long way about saying thank you for doing this, Aaron.
No, I'm glad to be here. I've been covering the team since 2017, so I like to think, I've got a decent idea of what Jim Harbaugh is thinking or saying or whatever the case may be. But yeah,
Awesome.
interesting times in Ann Arbor for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I've been behind Jim Harbaugh all the way through. I was even with him when a lot of well, I'd say half it appeared the fan base wanted him out prior to last season. But maybe that's because of the fact that I am older and I was there when Jim Harbaugh was playing. So I remember and I know how much he's loyal to the university. So I was giving him the benefit of the doubt. And I don't think there's any doubt. Even last year when they got off to a good start, there were a lot of skeptics. But the reason why I was not skeptical, and I said it all through the season, this is a different team. This is a different team, is because it was a different team. It was Jim Harbaugh going back to the basics. It's we're going to have a really good offensive line. We are going to run the football and we're going to play defense. That's how he was successful at Stanford, and that's how he's going to be successful at Michigan. And I can't imagine he's going to go and deviate from that plan anymore.
No, you're right. We'd seen it before. Michigan get off to good starts and win games and everything else, and then you get in the conference schedule and
Yeah.
they'd have a hiccup here or there. But it really, in my mind, flipped last year with the win at Wisconsin. It was a place they had not won in I think since like 2000 or something
Yes.
like that. They'd go on the road and they'd struggled there and not they'd often not be able to score and just it would be a disaster. And it was just a totally different game last year. They showed up ready and prepared, and it was a different game. I mean, they looked good. They handled the pressure. They won the line of scrimmage. They did whatever they wanted offensively, and we came out of that game. At least I did. Came out of that game thinking, okay, this is a different team. Because we had heard in the offseason, you hear it all the time. Different mojo. He had overhauled the coaching staff. They were going back to basics. They really liked the offensive line, the
Yeah.
running backs, yada yada. You hear that year after year. But that game really flipped to my mind and thinking, okay, this really is happening. They are really
Yes.
good. They've got an opportunity to compete here, and then it obviously went from there as the season progressed.
Well, let's talk about some of the big changes on the coaching staff because I got to ask this: why did Josh Gattis leave Michigan to go to Miami?
It's a good question and one we haven't gotten a complete answer
Really?
to. I will say this: it seemed like they were slowly gravitating away last year of what Josh Gaddis wanted to do from an X's and O's perspective. Because remember when he came in 2019, he was all about speed and space. He
Yep.
wanted to open things up and turn Michigan into more of kind of a modern offense, throw the ball
Uh-huh.
more and stuff like that. And they started to do that. And keep in mind, when he came in 2019, Michigan was picked to win the Big Ten that year. They had a lot of pieces back offensively. They had Shea Patterson back. Or he was coming in, excuse me. At that point, they had some receivers like Donovan Jones, guys that folks really liked, athletic freaks people thought would be NFL caliber players, and they just never able to figure it out. It took them like half the season to kind of get going offensively, and by that point, they like had a couple of losses, and then they obviously lose to Ohio State at the end of the year, but they were never able to figure it out. And the 2020 season was a disaster defensively, and I think Jim Harbaugh came into the 2021 season thinking, okay, I got to take this back over. We need to go, like you said, go back to basics, dominate the line of scrimmage, and that just didn't really jive with what I think Gaddis wanted to do. And you got the sense as the year went on last year that I don't want to say they were boxing him out, but it wasn't his offense. He had gone from calling
Right.
plays on the side of the field to back up in the box during games. He wasn't as active on the recruiting trail. There was just a lot going on there behind the scenes. I think that it became apparent that Josh wasn't maybe as valued as he was when he first showed up. And I think that was one of the reasons why he ended up leaving for Miami. Now, he did say publicly, or not publicly, there was a text he sent to the players after he departed that kind of leaked it through the media that he didn't feel valued. I think part of that stemmed from the rumors with Jim Harbaugh leaving for the NFL and Minnesota
Oh
Vikings.
yeah.
There were some rumblings that potential internal candidates, and the feeling was Gaddis wasn't one of them. And I think maybe he was really put off by that. And I don't know necessarily that was Jim Harbaugh's decision, but more or less the administration at Michigan. So either way, I think Josh just felt like he wasn't wanted anymore, and he left. And I think that's what he told the players, and that's why he's at Miami right now.
Interesting. And he goes to a place too, and it could only be for a very short time because Van Dyke could be in the pros real soon. But it's like, okay, well, you're not going to run a lot of those kind of spread concepts with him, are you? So, but it's only a year. But I get everything you're saying. It makes a lot of sense, and that makes it more understandable. Okay, so I don't want to talk too much about this, but do you believe now with what happened with Minnesota that that's it? No more Jim Harbaugh being tempted to go to the NFL.
I do. Jim tends to be honest with these type of things. You kind of take him for his word, obviously, but when he says he's kind of done looking, I think he legitimately is. Now, ever since he's gotten to Michigan, it's a running joke in the off, or not the off season, toward the end of the year. When the NFL starts, canning coaches and they start looking, his name would come up
Of
annually, and it
course.
was becoming a running joke, and
Yeah.
he would acknowledge it and everything else. Now, I think there was part of him that did want to go back to the NFL, and he said that, in his interview with the Vikings. The temptation is still there to win the Super Bowl and everything else, and I think that especially this past offseason, he was actively trying to go back. He wanted to. I think he in a way missed it. I think he felt like he accomplished a lot at Michigan. He'd been there 7 years, like he said. They finally gotten a Big Ten title and gotten to the playoffs. So there wasn't much more else to accomplish, and he still hasn't gotten to the Super Bowl. So that was a big thing. But he did say he's done. He's done. Now that being said, it would not surprise me if, say, Michigan has another great year this year, hypothetically speaking, an NFL team reaches out to him and actively pursues him. I think that would be the one opening where I think he could still go to the NFL, but I think his days of actively jockeying for a job in the NFL, I think, are probably over. Remember, he's getting up there in age too,
True.
and
Yeah.
and I think he feels like if he were to go back to the NFL, he would need some younger, trusted minds to kind of guide him in the modern offense and just from a personnel standpoint, everything else. But I think the NFL is always going to be there. I think it's one of those things that we enjoy doing. I think it's football at the highest level, and he's quote unquote football guy. So I think if an NFL team were to come pursue him, chase him, he probably would listen. But I think him of actively pursuing himself, I think
Okay.
you're probably
Well, I mean, I think he does have more work to do, and that's win a national championship. So, and because if that should be the goal, and I know that he's
right.
accomplished the first goal, and that was a big one. Can't get to the ultimate goal unless you accomplish those first ones. Got to win the Big Ten, got to get to the playoffs, and so you've got two of those, but got to now win a playoff game, and then next step, win a championship, that kind of deal. So, hey, Ohio State, that's what they do. That's their kind of deal every year. So I don't, as a fan who've been following the tradition of this football program, why shouldn't that be our accomplishments every year as well, our goals every year, to think about, hey, if we don't make the playoffs, then it's not a good season. Okay, so Weiss and Moore are now going to share coordinator duties. Is one going to call the plays, or is it going to be like a shared kind of deal between the two of them and Harbaugh?
Yeah, it sounds like a shared deal. And this kind of goes back to Jim's early days here at Michigan when there were times where he had an offensive coordinator, but he still kind of gave value or gave input on play calling. There were years where he didn't name an offensive coordinator; he still was calling the plays. But yeah, it's going to be a shared deal. Keep in mind, Sharon Moore, the offensive line coach and co-coordinator, who technically was a co-coordinator last year with Josh Gattis. Him and Matt Weiss, who was Michigan's quarterbacks coach last year, he's still quarterbacks coach, but also coordinator again this year. They've neither one has called plays ever before, college or professionally. Yeah. So this is a new thing for them too, and I think they're going to probably be the brains behind the operation, so to speak, in terms of game planning and maybe writing out scripts and things. But I think Jim Harbaugh is still going to be heavily involved. And it makes sense. I mean, like you said, when you go back and look at last year, which was very much a Harbaugh-esque offense, when the line of scrimmage dominate, run the football in between the trenches, I think you're going to see a lot of that still this year. And I think Jim's certainly going to be, leading that charge, I guess, having, maybe final say or giving input here and there and then kind of going from there.
Okay. Well, start at quarterback, and it's a good problem to have when you have two guys who could start, McNamara and McCarthy. And Bowman should probably even be starting somewhere else. I'm kind of surprised he came here, but it's good to have a veteran like that just in case. But anyway, McNamara and McCarthy. And I was a big McNamara fan before he got the job. Thought he should have got the job a lot earlier. I did not think the Milton thing was going to work, and it didn't. And I just think they waited way too long. And anyway, that's it is what it is. But McNamara finally gets the gig last year, as we all know. Does a great job. But now we get to the point where does he have the ability to be more than just a game manager, a Brian Griese? Can he do that? Because I don't think when we won the national championship with Brian Griese, if you look around the landscape of college football back then, they didn't have the competition that was out there now or the offense that we have now. So you have got to be able to throw the football a little bit. You have to have some dynamic offensive quarterback in some way, shape, or form if you're going to be the best of the best. Unless, of course, again, you're great at defense and you're great at the running game and all the other things. I think McNamara can still be that guy, but no doubt he's got to open it up. He has to be more of a passer. Do you think he has it in him? And what kind of a leash do you think he's going to get? Is it going to take a loss? Is it going to, or do you think even if they win, if McNamara is not looking like he's completing enough downfield passes, he's not putting any big plays in the arsenal before it does go wrong, that they would actually, make the switch and possibly give McCarthy some playing time here or there, like they did last year. But then, you know what? 1 week we're going to wake up and maybe they're 3 or 4-0, and they're going to go, no, we're going to give JJ McCarthy the opportunity to start this week.
That's a good question, and it's one we haven't really gotten a clear answer to. We talked to Jim Harbaugh this week, actually Wednesday, and kind of asked him about the quarterback situation, and he said there's been really no separation. At least he feels like there's been no separation between the two so far. And the game, first game is a couple of weeks away. So it's going to be a fascinating thing to play out, just because there's so many factors at play here. As you mentioned, Cade was very much a game manager last year. They went 12-2, had the best year under Jim Harbaugh, won the Big Ten title, yada yada yada. And it's hard to just yank the job away from someone like that. But you're right. He very much was a game manager last year. And that's one of the things they liked about him. He moved the offense, didn't turn the football over, didn't make a ton of mistakes, and got the job done. Now, the question is, like you said, is that good enough? Is that what you want? And it's a good question to ask, and I don't know if Michigan knows what the answer is either.
What do you think?
It sounds like.
What do you think? What would you do?
Because they had so much success with Cade last year, I would probably ride with him early on to see what he can do. Because I think Cade recognized in the offseason that he needed to improve in some areas too, which is a good thing. He said he worked on his footwork and his quickness and some of his arm strength and everything else. Now, it remains to be seen how much of that has improved and what he looks like now. But there's no doubt that J.J. McCarthy adds a different dimension to this offense. He's a quicker guy. He's got a stronger arm. He can make more plays. And I think we saw that in a little bit of time he played last year. So I think the ceiling is higher for J.J. McCarthy. I think he could probably take this offense to the next level, give pieces around him, and perhaps they have it this year. Jim Harbaugh has said that he believes this might be the best receiver group he's had since he's gotten to Michigan, which is saying a lot because they've had some good guys there. They got most of the offensive line back, so protection-wise, they should be okay. But I would not be surprised if this is a very much a feeling out process early on. Michigan's schedule is very easy to start. I mean, they should start 4-0, no problem. They got 3 cupcakes in the non-conference schedule, and they open the Big Ten schedule against Maryland at home. So I very much think they're going to probably use those first 4 games of feeling out process. I think Cade will probably get the start early. I would not be surprised if they give Cade to start the first game and maybe roll JJ the second game just to see what they both can do and go from there.
Would be nice.
It's very much a decision they have to make based on what they want. Do you want the playmaking quarterback who might make a mistake here and there, but he can make that incredible play, that game-winning play, and everything else? Or do you stick with the guy who's trusted and you know what you're going to get out of? Now, he may not be the J.J. McCarthy that can throw for 400 or 500 yards in the game and use his feet, but you know what you're going to get out of him. So, and you got to keep in mind too. I mean, there's not issues, but you got to take into account the players on the team. Cade is very well liked. He feels like this is his team, and he's got the backing of the players. Yeah. So you potentially risk alienating some guys, at least if you switch a quarterback. So it's a really delicate situation. I think Jim realizes that. He's had quarterback competitions in the past. You go back to 17, 18 with Spate and John O'Connor and the like. But the talent-wise, I think these two are just better. And I think Jim did that. And in a way, it's kind of an embarrassment of riches.
Yes.
I don't think he can lose either way, which is saying a lot because he's had some good quarterbacks in Michigan, but he's also had some duds, as you mentioned. So I think he's in a no-win or no-lose situation here. You just got to make a decision. And the era of the transfer portal makes it more difficult because if, say, you go to JJ and you risk alienating Cade, he's probably going to hit the portal. I mean, I would too. You want to go play somewhere else where you're going to play. So, and in the juggling situation where you switch guys in and out of games, I don't know if that works. I don't know. But this offense, I think, is poised to make a jump. They should be more explosive this year. That tends to lean toward JJ. But I don't think it's fair to necessarily write Cade off either. I mean, you won 12 games with the guy last year.
I agree.
Like he worked the offense. He was good. I mean, he was good. He wasn't great. He was good, and that's what they asked him to do. And I don't think it would be unfair to him just to pull the rug out from underneath him right now.
Yeah, I think the only issue is that if McCarthy all of a sudden just starts to play week 4, and then all of a sudden he's got to go to Iowa. That's not that he hasn't played enough, and I think he could handle it, but it's still a little bit of an ask. But yeah, look, I'm with you. I think Cade, unless JJ looks so good, and he looks like he's definitely ready, and we're just holding. He's got like you said, we know he's got a higher ceiling than McNamara. Then we're playing. But if that doesn't happen, he's still making some mistakes. And okay, go with McNamara. But I'm giving him a game or two, and if he's not showing that he's going to be better than last year. And like I said, let's see those completion percentages deeper down the field. They need to be better. If he doesn't improve upon that, and then this is all we're going to get is last year's Cade, I think you have to make the switch.
Yeah, I think
it could only be for a game or two. I'm not saying, hey, you make the switch and goodbye Cade. You just make the switch, and if JJ takes off and he's a superstar, well then Cade could transfer, I guess, if he wants. But if he doesn't take that next, if McCarthy doesn't explode immediately, then you can always go back to Cade.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think Jim realizes that too. It's a complicated situation, but it's a good one too. Like I said, I don't think they can lose either way. So I don't know. I think the first 3 or 4 games we're going to learn a lot. I hope so. We will, and I think it's a good opportunity for them too. It's not like last year where they opened against Western Michigan, but then their second game was against Washington. So it's a good way to kind of ease both of those guys in just to see what they got and how they're looking. And the one interesting thing kind of coming into camp that I was waiting to hear or see was, and this is for the listeners or viewers who don't know, J.J. McCarthy didn't throw it all in the spring. He was dealing with a shoulder injury. He was sidelined for most of spring, so Cade was getting most of the first team reps. He was the guy. So I think the coaches got a good look at him. They knew what they had there. And it kind of created this little bit of mystery coming into camp of how JJ would look and how quickly it would take him to try to get back up to speed, so to speak. And the fact that it's a competition neck and neck right now, at least according to Jim Harbaugh, it signals to me that either Cade hasn't improved like maybe they wanted him to, or JJ is just so much better that the fact that he can kind of come in right away
Good
and
point.
catch up. I mean, so.
Yep. All right. So running back Haskins is gone, and I think he's actually somebody that's on my list as far as sleepers in the NFL. Not this year, but down the road. I think he's going to have a really good career, and I think he's in the right scheme. But here at Michigan, Corum is back. Hopefully he stays healthy. You always worry about him because he's a little bit small, but, still, he's an exciting player. Donovan Edwards. Okay, we know the kid can catch, and that's going to be great. But how good could Donovan Edwards be? Do you think he's capable? Does he have the size? Is he capable of being a guy that can get 20 rushing attempts and 5 receptions a game? Can he do that? Can he be that type of guy?
I think so, and I think that's what Michigan envisions out of him. I look at Donovan Edwards almost as maybe a little bit better Blake Corum. He's a little bit bigger than him. I think he can go inside of tackles. He can go outside. You mentioned his pass catching ability, and I think Michigan really likes that. And I think they're going to lean on it a little bit this year. And I think that's part of opening up the offense. But they like Edwards. They've cautiously said that he can be very good. Jim Harbaugh doesn't like hyping up the young guys so much to get their heads big and the like. But you're going to see him a lot this fall alongside Corum, and I think that's going to be the question mark on the running backs is if Corum can stay healthy because he was banged up quite a bit last year. He got off to a really good start. I mean, all the first 6 weeks he was in the early Heisman conversation just because of the numbers he was putting up. But then he got hurt and it kind of slowed down, and they were leaning more on Haskins. But Michigan doesn't have that dominant, at least this year, that dominant between the tackle guy, running back they can lean on. That's what I think made their offense so effective last year. Is I think Hassan, he was going to get the carries anyway, but I think even they were surprised at the production he gave. And just the yards after contact they got and everything else. And it kind of created this dynamic in the running back room where you had one guy can go between the tackles and then you had Corum go on the outside. So it presented this challenge for the defense of not knowing what you're going to get necessarily. So with Corum and Edwards, it's a little bit more of the same. I think both can catch the football. Edwards probably more so. And at the same token, I think it's going to open the offense up. So if they can stay healthy, I think they'll be effective in the run game. Michigan's got 3 of their 5 starting offensive linemen back from last year. They got a grad transfer. The guys are there up front, so the holes will be there. It's just a matter of if they can kind of capitalize on those yards after contact that Hassan was so effective last year getting.
I think I look at it as much as Haskins did a tremendous job last year, and he's a completely different type of runner. The more touches, though. And again, this is if Corum's healthy. The more touches Corum and Edwards get, the more opportunities for bigger plays. Mm-hmm. So they're not going to be that type of, okay, it's 3rd and short, we're at the goal line, okay, we can rest on Haskins kind of deal. But maybe they won't need to be in that situation as much because the other guys, hey, when they get the ball, they're not going to go 4 or 5, they're going to go 8 or 9. Or maybe they're going to break, a 60 and a 70 every couple of games. So that's what I'm hoping for. And I think it's a realistic possibility.
It is. That's Corum's kind of bread and butter, breaking those big plays. I can remember, I think 2020 season opener against Minnesota, and Corum, he was a young guy at that point. He was just kind of starting to get his feet wet, so to speak, and he went deep. I think it was a 70 or 80 yard run. So he's capable of that. I think Michigan wants that out of him. And I think they feel like they can get that out of Donovan Edwards too. So Michigan, they should be dominant. They should be effective with the run game. I don't know, maybe not as effective as Hassan because he was so good at just breaking tackles and turning 2 yards into 4 and 4 yards into 6. But we'll see. They like the running back room. They think they can get a lot out of that. Edwards, I'm really curious to see how they utilize him this year because they used a lot. He was the number 3 back last year. He didn't play every game, but the times we did see him. He was a playmaking guy. You can get him on the outside with the ball and just kind of open things up for him. And it was, instead he was getting those deep plays from outside, not necessarily behind the line of scrimmage.
That's true. As far as if Corum does get banged up, who steps up? Is it Dunlap? Is it Stokes? Who do you think might be that next guy off the bench?
Yeah, we asked Jim Harbaugh that yesterday, and he didn't have a clear answer, which tells me that that the true freshman C.J. Stokes is in the running. Jim Harbaugh liked recruiting him a lot, and he was only a three-star kid, but he kind of has that build and that frame and that mentality of an Hassan.
Okay.
That get a couple extra yards and he can go between the tackles. I think Jim Harbaugh likes that a lot. Dunlap's a guy who's been in the program now. He was a true freshman last year. Didn't play much. He played garbage time at the end of game blowouts. Naturally, you think he'd be the next guy in line just based off of experience and everything else, but we'll see.
Okay.
That Jim doesn't know, and they've got some guys there. They've moved some guys from other spots, linebackers that try and fill a potential reserve role. Michigan's got, but behind the two starters, Michigan's got a whole group of guys I think they don't know what to do with. They don't really know what they have yet.
Right.
I think they're find out in games.
Well, hopefully we won't have to figure that out, and Edwards and Greene
Yeah.
will be healthy all year. Okay, tight ends. Now, Eric All came back, which was nice, especially with all the other tight ends that came out last year that were kind of all in the same kind of grade possibility. That I thought this was a really good idea for All. And also, you think that maybe he can improve, maybe even more in the passing game. We know what kind of an all-around player he is, which I think is something that the NFL does not see very often from the tight end position. But this other kid, so tell me about the fan favorite. This because you always hear the ooh from was it Schoonmaker or is
Yeah,
it Schumacher?
Schoonmaker.
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 Schoonmaker. Got it. Schoonmaker. Okay. So what kind of is he somebody that we should be keeping an eye on this year?
Yeah, both. If you look at advanced NFL, the scout early, I guess, reports from NFL scouts, they're both very similar. I think they both like their playmaking ability. We saw it a little bit more last year with Eric All. He had the game-winning touchdown catch against Penn State, and he was basically hobbling on one ankle, I guess, if we found out after the fact. But he was the higher-ranked recruit. He was a four-star kid out of Ohio. He's right in Ohio State's backyard. Michigan went and got him. He's developed. I mean, I can remember a couple of years ago where they were talking him up in practice. They liked his athletic ability. He's a huge kid. I mean, big frame. He had a big frame coming into college, and I think they saw NFL flashing lights with him, and it was just about kind of developing and bringing him along. But a couple of years ago, I mean, he had trouble catching balls. I mean, they throw him in games, and they throw the ball to him, maybe wide open. He was dropping passes left and right. And they got that figured out. He had a big year last year. And then Schoonmaker was kind of the blocking tight end. All would do it all. He would more so catch. Schoonmaker was the blocking guy. But I think this year, I think Michigan's poised to probably use them both in the passing game. They like what they have. Schoonmaker had a couple touchdown catches last year. You're going to see both, I think, in the passing game. And I think it's going to kind of complement what Michigan has at receiver. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Jim Harbaugh likes using tight ends. He has since he got to Michigan. Yes. He has no problem rolling with two tight end sets. And he probably will all in Schoonmaker because him and his coaches have said they believe that they have two of the better tight ends in the country. They like All a lot. They think Schoonmaker's come along, and I think the NFL early grades, at least from the scouts, seem to suggest the same. I think both of them right now are third or fourth round picks right now going into the year, with an opportunity to try and obviously improve that with big years.
Well, it's not a Bowers Gilbert combo, but it's still a very, very solid all around combo, which we talked about, which, like I said, is kind of rare. All right, wide receivers. It was so devastating when Ronnie Bell went out last year, especially what he did early in the game. It was like, oh, he's going to be the next really explosive receiver at Michigan. This is awesome.
Right, 70-yard touchdown catch too. It's like, okay, he's poised for this big year, and he was expected to have one, and then
teased
he has
us.
a freak injury.
Yes, and then it goes downhill. And at that point, it was like, does that mean our season's gone already? Because you know how valuable he was at that point. But anyway, opened the door for other players. But before we get into those other players, yeah, Ronnie Bell is back. I questioned the whole idea of putting him back at punt returning again. But okay. But he has a pretty big ceiling, doesn't he? I mean, I know there doesn't seem to be a lot of talk about him nationally. And that's probably because the year before his numbers weren't that big. He was supposed to explode last year. He did it a couple plays, but then just gone. So I think he's a hidden gem, isn't he?
Yeah, I mean, he's a kid that's kind of flown on the radar ever since he got to Michigan. I remember when Jim Harbaugh found him out of Kansas City a few years back, he wasn't even going to play football at that point. He had a basketball scholarship to like Missouri State or something, and his dad was a basketball coach, and he was determined to play basketball. And then they really convinced him, hey, like we like you at receiver, we believe you can be a star, and he ended up at Michigan. He played as a true freshman, he made some mistakes, but they saw in him an ability to get open and make catches, and I think you saw that as time has kind of gone on. He's last year at least he was going to be Michigan's primary downfield threat, and then once he goes down to injury, Michigan really didn't have
No.
any else. I mean, they had a group of guys, but they were young, inexperienced. I think Michigan hadn't really found roles for them just yet, and it really affected the passing game because he was going to be the number one guy. He was going to be the guy they leaned on down the field, and they lose it, and they lose in week one. And I think it was a big blow to their offense. It was a big blow to Ronnie. I know from a mental standpoint, he wasn't happy about everything, and I don't blame him. I mean, you expect to have a big year, and you suffer a season-ending ACL injury that could affect going forward. And I think that's the question kind of coming into this year: is does he have the same speed, same ability to kind of separate himself from defensive backs? Because if he does, he could be one of the best receivers in the Big Ten. He's got that speed, that knack, that ability, that leadership. They're going to lean on him early. From all accounts and all signs, he looks like the same guy. Jim Harbaugh cautiously called him camp MVP yesterday when we talked to him. So sounds like he's picked up where he left off. And if that is the case, if in fact it's true, Michigan should have a good receiver group because they got a lot of guys back that played last year. Kind of got their, Cornelius Johnson, their pass catching leader, is back. He had some good games against some not so great competition.
Yeah, does he have another level? Because, like you said, you were just saying, I was surprised when I even looked at his stats. I was like, I didn't realize he was that productive. He was very quietly productive. So was that more of, okay, well, there wasn't anybody else. Do you think he's got another gear in him?
I do. I think if you look deeper at those numbers at production level, they came against the lower tier competition. When they got into the Michigan States and the Ohio States, you saw opposing teams kind of stick their best defensive back on Cornelius, but he was off teams. So there were games there where he was fairly quiet and silent. You didn't get a lot out of him. So I think that's the next step here. I think having Ronnie back is key because you're going to kind of take some of that pressure off of Cornelius. And I would not be surprised if he ends up as Michigan's leading receiver by the end of the year. He's got the size and the frame. He reminds me a little bit more of a more active Donovan Peoples-Jones. He can go up there and get the football. He's got good hands. And now he's got a couple years under his belt. So I think he's poised to be probably one of Michigan's better receivers. And then you got a group of guys that were kind of recruited in the Josh Gattis speed and space idea. They're kind of the slot guys: Roman Wilson, AJ Henning, got Andrel Anthony. He was a true freshman last year, had that big game against Michigan State, and then you didn't really hear from him the rest of the year. But he showed his explosiveness and his ability to take a ball deep. So Michigan's got a lot of guys that can do a lot of things, just not a lot of experience, and they weren't consistent last year. I know that's a cliche term, but it's the truth. I mean, you get one guy would have a big game one week, and then they'd be quiet another week, and then you get another guy having a game that the following week. So it's about, I think, finding their identity in the passing game, kind of finding roles for some of these guys, and then just letting them grow. And I think the year under their belt's going to help. Obviously, the quarterback situation will be a big part of that. Who's throwing the football? But the big problem last year with Ronnie out was just the inability of the receivers to create separation. And I think that's what I'm looking for early this year is that some of these guys can kind of break that mold and take that next level.
That's a good point because if Bell does stay healthy the entire season, then it's a trickle-down effect, and it helps everybody else out, gets them opportunity to face not the competition that they faced last year. And I'll say this, is that there's got to be a little bit of I don't know if you want to blame the coach, the play calling, or the quarterback, but when you're constantly throwing the ball to your running backs and throwing the ball to your tight ends, and you're running the ball a lot, and that's where we get to that. Well, Cade had 18 pass attempts, 16 of them were within 5 and 7 yards. Do we blame these receivers, or is it the offense? But if McCarthy's on the center, I'm not so sure he's ducking it down to the running backs and tight ends. I think he's using his wide receivers.
Yeah, and that play may play a factor in who they determine plays quarterback. Like I said, like if they're confident in these receivers and they're showing something in practice and they're getting better, they can create separation. Yeah, maybe you go with JJ. I don't know if that's going to factor in, but I think it's got to cross the back of your mind because I think the pieces around you very much can dictate what this offense does. If they're confident receivers, maybe you go with go with the JJ. And I think that was one of the reasons why they were fine rolling with Cade last year, because they weren't confident in receivers. I think they're trying to still figure out how good the
Sure.
offensive line
Yeah.
was. And I think that was part of the game plan, especially early last year. Is they were running the football, because they didn't know, A, they weren't confident in receivers, and B, they're trying to figure out what the heck they had.
And it was
And it
working.
was a right, exactly. And it was working.
Yeah.
Right. And it's so funny because I can remember last year the criticism, like, from the fans, this offense is boring. Right? They're not playing the football. What the heck? But at the end of the day, they're winning games,
yes.
and I think that at that point, it's all that mattered, because the heat was on Jim Harbaugh and the coaching staff and everything else. He just overhauled things. Pressure was on. They knew they had to win games, and when you're desperate, you run football.
Okay, and by the way, I remember even last year in the beginning of the season, I remember, what was it, that Western Michigan game, the first game, that when they were, all right, this is the new offense, the new running game. I remember there was a lot of 2 yards, 3 yards. It was a work in progress. It wasn't like the first couple of games we were opening these massive holes, and it took time. But that's the thing. You have to stick with it. You have to keep sticking with it, and the repetition finally all worked out as the season wore on. This freshman receiver, Clemens, any chance that he either becomes part of the offense a little bit this year, and if not, does he have a really bright future?
Yeah, Michigan really likes the 3 freshmen they brought in this class: Darius Clemens, Tyler Morris, and Amarian Walker. Jim Harbaugh talked them up in the spring. The coaches have talked them up. It almost seems like every time we ask about them, one coach mentions one of them and another coach mentions another. So I think you're going to see all 3 at some point this year.
Okay.
Now, I don't think you're going to maybe they're going to throw them out there week 1 just to see. I think it'll probably take some time. I mean, they've got 6 or 7 guys, scholarship guys, and I think they're confident in. And again, we still need to see what this offense looks like. If they're going to come out and run the football a lot like they did last year, there's going to be no need for them, really.
Save the red shirt. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we'll see. I mean, they're certainly going to get their feet wet. They like what they have. I think you probably could see a couple of them, with whether it's Clemens or Walker, maybe on special teams. But yeah, I sound like they're going to play. To what degree, I don't know. But knowing Jim Harbaugh's history and his usage of true freshmen, he tends to try to want to bring them along, as opposed to just throwing them out there and get them going right away.
All right, the Joe Moore Award-winning offensive line loses a couple of guys, but for the most part, this could be just as good as an offensive line as last year's, because now you mentioned the Virginia center transfer arrives, so that's nice. The only question on the offensive line really is, well, does Ryan Hayes have, or even Zach Zinter, Trevor Keegan, these guys, do they have another year themselves? Are they going to step up and be even more dominant? And what about the right tackle spot?
Yeah, that's a good question. And I think going through last year, I think they learned what it took to be competitive, not only the Big Ten, but the national stage. So I don't expect much drop off at all from this offensive line. In fact, they could be theoretically better than they were last year. Hayes is a guy who's been talked about quite a bit. He was recruited, gosh, it seems like ages ago now, but I can remember 2 offensive line coaches ago, Ed Warner, who's kind of bringing him along. He thought Ryan Hayes could eventually become a top-tier NFL lineman. They really like what he had. He was a former basketball player. They brought him in as a tight end and kind of converted him into a tackle. But no, they're really high on him. The left guard, Zach Zinter, or excuse me, he would be Trevor Keegan. Trevor Keegan's left guard. He got his feet wet last year. Started most of the season. They like what they have. They like what they have there. You mentioned the Virginia transfer, Olshigan Oluwatimi.
Yeah, I'll let you pronounce that. Yeah.
Yeah, they call him Olu. I know that. He was a Remington finalist last year. I think, with him, it's kind of all basically just bringing him in and getting acclimated to the offense, not quarterbacks. But it sounds like he's doing just fine. Zach Zinter, another lineman who was praised. I can remember last year, Josh Gattis, their then offensive coordinator, he called Zinter potentially one of their best offensive players, just as a unit. So they really like what he has, too. So I expect this offensive line to be just as good. Right tackle, it sounds like Trente Jones is the starter.
Okay.
He won that job coming out of spring. He's kind of handled it in fall camp. But so the experience is there. They like the depth. They've essentially got they believe they've got a 6 starting offensive lineman, Carson Barnhart. He was competing with Trente Jones at right tackle. He can play right or left tackle. He played some guard last year. He started some games.
Okay.
So they've kind of got a 6 offensive lineman. They feel like they can plug and play if needed, if there's an injury, whatever the case may be. But no, this group is I think just as talented, just as deep. They've recruited the position very well the last few years, even with the coaching changes and the kind of the offensive changes. Michigan's done a good job there, so I think they're real confident in the offensive line, and that opens up a lot of doors for them. Obviously, not obviously in the run game, but depending on who the quarterback is, there behind center or the passing game as well.
I think this is really, and again, this is why I think now it's all straight ahead. Let's just keep recruiting the hell out of this offensive line. Just keep going to what worked in the past, because it all starts on the offensive line. And if you can continue to churn in really good offensive lines every year, then Michigan is going to always have a chance. You build the offensive line and you get these quarterbacks. That's it. Get the quarterbacks and the offensive line. Everything else will take care of itself. The skill position players, they could find them anywhere. So,
and they do a good job of convincing these guys to stay in the program the entire time. They don't have a ton. I mean, you mentioned the transfer center, but in the last few years there haven't been a ton of transfers. The guys that have kind of come in, learn the way, bided their time, and then they're finally in their sophomores, juniors, and they typically wait till their senior year. And a lot of these guys are older, they're experienced, and been around the block a few times now. They know what, and again, they saw the success of last year. They know what they won the battles at the line of scrimmage against the Wisconsins and the Ohio States. So like they know what it takes. Yes. Obviously, they were, I think, overmatched against Georgia, but I don't think there are many offensive lines that were going to go up against the Georgia defense.
But again, that's I think the idea of JJ McCarthy, because you said, we're not going to beat Georgia running the ball like this. I mean, we need the explosive plays, and that's where McCarthy comes in. So yeah, and look, I honestly believe that unless McNamara has that next level in him, if he doesn't, McCarthy can make this offense so much more explosive and so much more better, which is why, and all the fans know, which is why.
Oh, yeah.
He shouldn't have much of a leash. Okay, Jesse Minter is now the defensive coordinator. The good thing is he's got that tenure with McDonald with the Ravens. So there's really not going to be a lot of scheme changes, correct?
Correct. This is basically, and the coaches have said this is year 2 of the McDonald defense. And Mike was only here for a year, kind of came in and changed things a little bit schematically. I shouldn't say a little bit. He drastically changed things. They went from kind of being a one-trick pony to kind of diversifying themselves, and it left opponents wondering what the heck they were going to do, because they were often changing looks up front. They're going with odd man fronts. They change into zone defense. They weren't afraid to go with 5 defensive backs in the backfield. They're constantly changing, and I think it gave opposing offenses fits. It worked against Ohio State. So yeah, Minter kind of comes in as kind of a continuation of that. Minter worked with McDonald and the Baltimore Ravens. He has experience running defenses. He did it at the lower level, Georgia State, Illinois State. He was at Vanderbilt for 1 year last year. And obviously, that's a little bit different situation. They weren't very good, but I think very much Jim Harbaugh hired him as being Mike McDonald version 2.0. Yeah. He basically told him to come in here, learn what we were doing last year. You can obviously fine tune some things and tweak some things, and they're going to have to based on the personnel that they have this year. But it's very much going to look, I think, very similar to what we saw last year.
Yeah, and that's important. So yeah, that's something that I'm looking forward to. By the way, Don Brown and the Joe Milton experiment, those were the 2 worst decisions that Jim Harbaugh made, was letting it go 1 extra year. That was the thing I just couldn't believe that he let. He should never have brought Don Brown back in 2020, and he should never have given Joe Milton another long opportunity to win that quarterback job. It just destroyed that limited season, which is why maybe out of anything that he did wrong, I think he deserved the criticism for those, I think, were terrible decisions.
Jim was very loyal to Don. I can remember it back in like 18 and 19, him calling Don the best assistant coach he had worked with, and blah blah blah. And he really, and look, up to that point, Michigan's defense had been very good statistically. They were near the top of the country. They would have blowouts on occasions. You would see the blowouts to Ohio State. They would occasionally have fits with the over the middle passing game against other teams.
Yeah.
But they're one-trick ponies. Opposing teams knew what they were going to do.
Yep.
Ohio State had scouted them to death, and that was the reasons why you saw those lopsided games, because Ohio State just had the better athletes.
Yep.
And when you put that man press coverage and you're quicker guys, you're going to.
It was never going to work. It was never going to work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right, and there was a lack of a willingness to change on Don Brown's part Don Brown's part. And look, that's what got him the dance. That's what he knew. That's who he's familiar with. So I guess I don't blame him. But you're right. I think Jim Harbaugh absolutely deserved criticism for latching on him maybe a year or two longer than they probably should have. The experiment had run its course. Michigan kind of fallen off recruiting a little bit on the defensive side of the ball, especially in the secondary. And that 2020 season just exposed a lot. And they obviously did a lot of changes on Jim's staff.
Yeah, if you got a weak secondary or a questionable secondary and you blitz as much as he does, that's a bad matchup. Okay, quickly on the defensive side. So yes, Hutchinson's gone, Ojabo's gone, Daxton Hill is gone. Those are the three big names up front. Hutchinson and Hitton, the starters, are gone. So who's taking the next step? Mozzie Smith, Mike Morris, are those guys that were there last year ready to take a big jump? And will we see Derek Moore this year?
Yeah, Mozzie's the guy we've heard a lot about this offseason. He's been in the program a couple of years now. He got his starting role last year at nose tackle. He figures to kind of be the ringleader, I guess, of the defensive line. He's a quiet guy, but he's a guy who's, I think, respected by his teammates. Jim Harbaugh brought him to Big Ten Media Days a few weeks ago in Indianapolis, so it goes to show you what he thinks of Mozzie Smith. He's going to be the centerpiece of that operation. No, I think it'd be ridiculous to say Michigan's defense is going to be as good as it was last year because I just don't see it. I think they're going to take a step back. They just don't have the edge rushing star power that they had with. I mean, remember going into last year, it was just Aiden Hutchinson. That's what everyone was talking about. He was expected to be very good, and he ended up being that. But we also saw the resurgence of David Ojabo, whose name was nowhere to be found this time last year. Yes, I mean he was in the running to play, but you didn't realize you were going to get the production that you did out of there. So I think that really kind of put the icing on the cake with the Michigan defense. The edge rushing returned, which I think helped the linebackers who were relatively young. They had Josh Ross, who was a senior there, but they were breaking in some younger guys. And then they had a secondary that was very unproven too. So I think that helped everyone across the board. This year, it's a different story. You got guys that have been in the program a couple years now, Mike Morris, Jalen Harrell, Braden McGregor, Taylor Upshaw. Morris and Upshaw played a little bit. Upshaw started in the past. He was part of that disastrous 2020 year when he got some starts that year. So guys have gotten their feet wet, but I don't think Michigan knows what they're going to get out of them. And they've said as much. They acknowledge they're not going to get the production that they did out of two guys like Hutchinson and Ojabo. It's probably going to have to come from 4 or 5. So I think you're going to see some specialty guys. I think you're going to see maybe an Upshaw and a Mike Morris on maybe first and second down. You might see a Braden McGregor and Jalen Harrell on third down and pass rushing situations. You're going to see a lot of, I think, mixing and matching and a lot of substitution, trying to figure out what the heck they have. Because I don't think they know what they have. And so it'll be a lot of experimenting, a lot of unknowns. I don't think you're going to see them get to the quarterback nearly as often as they did last year. And I think it's going to put more pressure on the back end. So we'll see how it goes. I think they take a step back. How big of a step back, I don't know, and that remains, I think, the big question.
But again, I think the other, once again, brings in the J.J. McCarthy situation, because if you're not going to be able to play elite defense, you need more points.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
Got to outscore your opponent.
Yeah. Hill Green, is he the next, interior linebacker that would be, at the top of the depth chart?
I would think so, yeah. He's the guy. He started a little bit. He started quite a bit last year. He came on, and he impressed the coaching staff. Mike McDonald really liked him a lot. They think he's got a good IQ, high IQ, and I think that's one of the reasons why they were comfortable putting him in there.
Okay.
But yeah, him and Junior Colson are going to be the linebackers back there. They've got a third option, Michael Barrett, who's another guy who's been around the program a while. He was a big part of Don Brown's defense. Kind of they bring him in third down situations and kind of rush the quarterback and the like. So I think you'll see him occasionally. He didn't play a lot last year, but he's a fifth-year senior. He's a guy who's been around a while, so I think they're going to utilize him a bit. So those are the three primary guys at linebacker. They're very flimsy there. They don't have a lot of depth. So if injuries pile up, it's going to be a concern. They got a lot of young guys back there who haven't played a ton. So, but they really like Junior Colson. I mean, he's a guy.
Yeah, I'm hearing that. Yeah.
Yeah, he was kind of brought in under Don Brown to be that next Viper, that Jabril Peppers, esque type guy. Obviously, the defenses have changed a little bit, but they really like. He's a mature kid. He's a hard worker. He's got a fascinating story. Refugee from Haiti and everything else, came to the U.S. and found football and everything else.
Nice.
Fascinating kid, really nice kid. But yeah, it'll probably be Junior Colson and Hill Green starting there at linebacker.
Okay, and then in the secondary, again, Hill's gone, Vincent Gray's gone. It does look like, though, and Brad Hawkins gone at safety, but it looks to me like it may actually be okay back in the secondary. There seems to be a little bit more depth.
I agree. I think it could be a strength of this defense. And I was looking at it the other day, and I'm thinking, they got the experience here. They got some talent. They got some guys I really like. Jamon Greene, he's going to be a starting corner. He's a big body. He's gotten better he's a guy, again, started in 2020, that awful year. He's kind of grown up, so to speak, in this Michigan defense. I think he could be very good. DJ Turner, another guy who they brought to Big Ten Media Day, so you think that they think that he could be a real good player back there. Guys who started a little bit last year, got their feet wet, got playing time. And then the safeties, same situation. They've got, R.J. Moten, who started last year as a redshirt freshman. McCarthy Page, who's kind of come on as time has gone on. And then Rod Moore, a guy who started as a true freshman last year. He suffered injury in the offseason, but they like what they have there. And then they have moved a receiver, Mike Sanders, still over to the secondary. He spent a lot of the spring there playing nickel, and he looked good in the spring game. I mean, it was only a few minutes, but I thought he looked real comfortable back there. He was able to stay with his defenders. He made a play on the ball. So I think, they like the depth back there. They probably got 6 or 7 guys they feel like they could probably throw in there to start a game, which is again, a good thing. I think the next step for the group is to create more turnovers.
Yes.
They really weren't able to get many interceptions last year. Now, they didn't really have to because the pressure was so much at the quarterback, but you like to see them, I think, make more plays on the ball. And I think that's something the defensive backs coach, Steve Klinkskill, has kind of been pushing. They want more turnovers, more interceptions. And I think you're going to need it this year when you've got less pressure on the quarterback. Teams are probably going to throw the ball a little bit more. So they got to make some plays in the back end. And I think the secondary could be real strength, especially if the pass rushing isn't holding up.
Yeah, because I look at guys like Ross and like Hawkins, solid veterans, knew the defense, knew what they were.
They were decent players. They weren't great. Yeah,
exactly. They're not gonna. I don't even know if either were drafted. Was Hawkins drafted? Neither were drafted.
Nope.
But these guys, I think, are more talented. These guys have the ability to be drafted in a couple of years because they're still so young. But like you said, they've got a little bit of taste, a little bit of playing time. So yes, I actually think they actually could be better. And like you said, more importantly, create some more turnovers. By the way, Will Johnson, was he the top recruit this year?
Yeah, he was. He was a 5-star kid out of Michigan here nearby. Big Michigan guy. His dad went to Michigan, played at Michigan, so he was really heralded kind of in the recruiting class. It sounds like he was impressive in spring. I haven't heard his name as much in fall camp.
Okay.
But I think they're going to try and find a role for him, whether it's at dime or nickel or even on special teams or something. I think they're going to try and find a way to get him in there again, get his feet wet. But again, you don't want to be relying on guys who are true freshmen.
And there's no reason to. Yeah.
Especially in a complicated defensive system. That's one of the things about Mike McDonald, as I said, when he overhauled things and changed things up. It was complicated. That the players had to learn a lot. There's a lot of different nuances and things that it just wasn't as simplistic as what Don Brown was running. So it's going to take him some time, but they like his athleticism. They like what he brings to the table. So I certainly expect to see him at some point this year.
All right. And then special teams I don't think it's been, well, at least a kicking game. I don't think it's been this good in a long time. Mm-hmm. Moody, Rosa winner. There have been years and years and years of bad kicking for Michigan. So when Moody came in, wow, it was just a breath of fresh air. He's elite. Robbins looks elite. And if Bell actually does return punts, this could be, once again, maybe the best special teams in all of college football. And again, another recipe of what Jim Harbaugh's trying to do at Michigan. Line of scrimmage, defense, offensive line, special teams, and so forth. So this is a real breath of fresh air to see that the special teams unit is going to be really good again.
Yeah, they really value the special teams. They're if you look statistically, they're one of the top in the country last year. Jake Moody's an interesting guy. He's been around the program for so long now, and I can remember a couple of years ago they were alternating kicking duty with him and the other kid. I can't remember his name.
I can't remember his name either now. That's
anyway, but. But they're alternating duties. Like one was doing extra points, one was doing field goals, or they'd like alternate field goals attempts. It was a bizarre approach. But they've settled on Jake Moody now. He had a really good year last year. He's really automatic. I'd say under 40 yards, under 45 yards. Anything longer, he's a little iffy. But he's got a reliable leg, and I think that's what they like. They don't want to be attempting a ton of 50-yard kicks. That's obviously not ideal. You want your offense moving down the field. But no, he's been fantastic. He's reliable. He's consistent. I think that's really what you want. Robbins, again, Another guy's been in the program. He's I think a fifth-year graduate student. He probably could have went to the NFL last year, but decided to come back. Another strong, reliable leg. He was considered, I think, one of the top punters a couple of years ago. Not last year, but a couple of years ago. He was running for one of the top punting awards. So, yeah, they're going to be good. They figure that to be very good. That'll be factored in.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things. They were very special teams is one of those situations where you don't want many, like, you don't really notice it until they screw up.
Yeah,
They
sure.
miss a long field goal, or you shank a punt, whatever the case may be, and they just didn't
or
do
you
that.
miss kicks that you shouldn't be missing, and that's what's. By the way, I think the kicker you're talking about wasn't he the one that got drafted by the Patriots?
Yeah,
and the Patriots tried to have him win the job, but Nick Folk ended up just destroying him, and he never really got a shot. But
yeah, Quinn Nordine was the name.
What was that?
Quinn Nordine.
Quinn Nordine. Okay, good. Yes. All right, so no more Quinn Nordine talk. But anyway, yeah, special teams should be really good, and that's something to be excited about. I usually ask before I let my these interviews go. I usually ask about like draft picks, breakthrough players. You've already mentioned some, so let me see. Would you say that breakthrough player though on offense, Donovan Edwards has got to be at the top of the list?
Yeah, he would be number one, I think, in my mind, just because they have so many guys coming back. So it's hard to find a breakout guy because a lot of these guys are either at decent years last year. So, yeah, I think he would be at the top of the list. Cornelius Johnson, he led the team receiving yards last year, but I would not be surprised if he has a big year this year as well.
Okay, and Mozzie Smith maybe, or Junior Colson, could he be a good breakout?
Yeah, statistically, probably Colson would be the guy just because he's a linebacker.
Sure.
And obviously top the box score, I guess. But yeah, him and Mozzie Smith, I think, would be two guys to pay attention to. I think if Smith has a good year inside, and that's been a knock against this Michigan defense for several years now, is just the lack of interior pressure. And I think if they can get that from Smith this year, I think it would help a lot. Because Michigan's always been known for having good edge rushers and good pressure on the quarterback, but they would always struggle against the run game. And I think with Smith, if he gets a big year, I think it would quell some of those concerns and obviously help the edge rushing too. So yeah, those would probably be the two. Mike Morris, one of the edge rushers, I think is interesting to watch. Okay. Michigan, I mean, they've had this. It almost seems like every year they lose some superstar edge rusher, and the question then becomes, well, who replaces them?
Yes.
It's a question of whether can they do it, and if there's a guy to do it to kind of become that next superstar guy, I think Mike Morris could be it. He's bulked up his frame. He looks fantastic. I don't know if he has the speed and the quickness yet. We'll see. But he certainly looks the part, so we'll see it come this fall.
Yeah, he might. And what is it, 6'6", 290?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when you're 6'6", 290, and if you want to rush the passer, I think he needs to lose a little weight. I think he needs to, because that's too big.
Right.
Unless he wants to be, and I don't think he wants to be, a 3-4 end in the NFL. So if he wants to be more of an edge rusher, 15 pounds, I mean, he's got to lose it.
Right.
Anyway, we'll see. But good pick there. I was going to ask you about edge rushers. All right, Aaron, I really appreciate it. About 15 minutes over than my normal interviews, maybe even 20 minutes with some of them, but that's because I talk more in this one than I normally do, being a Michigan fan. And I really appreciate the extra time and appreciate you talking Michigan football. And I hope we get the opportunity to talk at least, once during the regular season.
Yeah, absolutely. Be glad to do it.
And by the way, podcast. Wolverine Podcast. Yeah. Is that what it's called?
Wolverine Confidential.
Confidential. And it's available where?
On Spotify, Apple, all the major podcasts.
Every day, once a week?
A couple times during the season, usually twice a week. Yep.
Okay.
Early week, end of week, we kind of preview the game, go over the last game. We'll dive into any interesting comments from the coaches. We touch it all.
Excellent. Wolverine Confidential. Aaron McMann, I thank you very much once again, and we'll talk to you during the season.
Yep. Thanks for having me.